Can I welcome all members and officers to this meeting of Cabinet, which due to government advice to practice social distancing will be held virtually once again. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed as soon as is possible following the meeting. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing this meeting from remote locations. Please could everybody ensure that the mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. I will ask officers to present a summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that time, but I would ask that with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. If any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should press the hands up icon on the screen hand at the top right hand side of the Microsoft Teams window, and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Please also do not use the chat button, as on Teams we cannot clear any text on the meeting recording, as we could when we were previously using Skype for meetings. Please lower your hand once you've finished speaking. Officers from Democratic Services will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and when necessary will mute those not being used. Before we formally commence, I will now ask the officer from Democratic Services to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at this meeting. Michael, please.
Thanks, Leader. Cabinet members in attendance today are Councillor Charles Smith, Cabinet Member Education and Regeneration, Councillor Danisha Patel, Cabinet Member Wellbeing and Future Generations, Councillor Hugh David, Leader and Chairperson, Councillor Howell Williams, Deputy Leader, Councillor Nicole Burnett, Cabinet Member Social Services and Early Help, and Councillor Richard Cabinet Member Communities. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I will ask the officers to introduce themselves as and when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. Officers too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. We have not received any apologies for absence, as we have just heard. All members of the Cabinet are present, as are all members of the Corporate Management Board. We will now receive declarations of interest, if any, of a prejudicial or personal type from members and officers in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct adopted by the authority in 2008. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No? Then we shall now move on to the minutes of the last meeting of Cabinet on the 19th of January. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting, the last meeting of Cabinet on the 19th of January, please?
Move. Happy to move.
Okay.
Second then.
I got two movers and a seconder there. Is everyone in agreement with those minutes, please?
Agreed.
Aye.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. The first report we have on the agenda for today's meeting is on the corporate plan 2018 to 2023 reviewed for 2021 to 2022. I invite the Interim Chief Officer Finance Performance and Change to present this report. Jill, please.
Thank you, Leader. My name is Jill Lewis and I'm the Interim Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change for the recording. The document you have in front of you this afternoon is the Council's corporate plan for 2018 to 2023, which has been reviewed for 21-22. And the purpose is to seek Cabinet endorsement of the plan prior to submission to Council for approval tomorrow. The corporate plan itself is set out in Appendix A to the cover report. So the corporate plan for 18-23 describes the Council's vision for Bridgend County Borough. It describes our 3 wellbeing objectives and our organisational values and principles that underpin how we'll work to deliver our priorities. And I think it's fair to say, despite everything that this year's thrown at us all, we continue to be ambitious in our plans for the future. And our vision of a one council working together to improve lives remains more than ever perhaps an important focus for us all. Our 3 wellbeing objectives continue to be relevant to the work that we do and what we want to achieve, supporting a successful, sustainable economy, helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient, and a smarter use of resources. And these underpin everything we do and are closely linked to the financial reports that you'll receive later. The plan also represents our contribution to achieving the 7 national wellbeing goals as set out in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act and our improvement objectives under the local government measure. And I think it's fair to say that corporate planning in the middle of a global pandemic has never been more difficult, or you could argue never more important. The corporate plan's been written at a time of great uncertainty and change, and the outcome of the recent consultation Fit for the Future has helped us to shape where we should concentrate our efforts going forward. We know from responses that people have valued having access to community facilities, parks, being outdoors, and that they're concerned about the economy and the impact of businesses and employment. And we recognise the lasting impact this will have on the well-being of children and young people and their education, as well as the mental health of all our residents and indeed all our workforce and council alike. There's also concerns that have been raised of the impact of COVID-19 on some of our most deprived communities. Those most vulnerable in our society, including the elderly and on the BAME community. We'll continue to be ambitious in our plans for the future and making sure that those are fully taken into account. So the corporate plan has been refreshed for 21-22 following a corporate planning process with corporate directors, heads of service through each directorate's departmental management team. And that process was carried out between October 2020 and December 2020 to review progress, streamline the plan, and to focus on reviewing our commitments and indicators to further maximise our contribution to the national wellbeing goals, whilst recognising what we all know has been and still is a very challenging environment. Cabinet will also be aware that as part of the work undertaken to develop the Council's approach to recovery planning from COVID, a cross-party recovery panel was set up with the aim of shaping, informing and advising Cabinet on the Council's recovery planning. And the recommendations, I'm pleased to say, from that panel have been used to inform the review of the refreshed corporate plan for 21-22. There's 2 key issues, I think, that I'd like to draw your attention to this afternoon. Targets and the timeline of the plan. And I'm sure that Cabinet will understand that many targets that were set for 2021 have quite frankly, become meaningless or cannot be collected in the way anticipated due to the ongoing impact of COVID-19, lockdowns impacting on schools, the local economy, and the one that I often mention, the footfall in the town centre. So that's meant that setting realistic performance indicators for 21-22 has become much more difficult, and specific targets even more so. As a result, some targets have been removed, and where we have put in targets, we reverted to measuring and establishing a new baseline. As part of the annual review, it's also proposed to extend the lifespan of the current corporate plan by 1 year to 2023. And the rationale for that is twofold. The local elections have been pushed back by a year. They were expected to take place in May 21, but are now being held in 22. And that enables any new administration to set its new corporate plan post-election and ties the corporate plan into the 5-year cycle in line with the election cycle. And secondly, public service boards are required to undertake an assessment of well-being 12 months prior to local elections. And so this assessment and the next future trends report to be published in 21-22 should be used to inform a new corporate plan. The Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee have scrutinised the plan, and the recommendations have been incorporated into the documents before you today. This committee will continue to monitor progress against the plan through the corporate performance assessment process. So the detailed plan is attached at Appendix A for approval, and I take you to the recommendations at 9.1.
Thank you for that, Jill. This is, of course, the most important plan that we receive as a cabinet and as a council, and I'm particularly pleased that once again we've had full and effective and constructive engagement with all members through the overview and scrutiny process, and that the recommendations that they have made have been reflected in the updated plan. I can see that Councillor Burnett wants to come in, so I will bring in Councillor Burnett, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm happy to move this. I'm particularly welcoming of the objectives that we've set in place, and particularly the work that's been done, considering the sort of position that we found ourselves as a result of COVID, and the partnership relationships that we've been managing to strengthen due this process, and the council's commitment to the concepts of co-production and co-design by our communities. So I'm glad to see that's been recommended, and a commitment's been made to that, because the prevention agenda is so important, and what has been proved through this crisis is that if we can identify personal and social needs of the individual and tackle isolation and loneliness and other sort of community responses to an individual's difficulties, often expensive clinical interventions and expensive care packages aren't needed, but at the same time the person is happier. So it's a win-win, and focusing on cause and prevention will result in happier residents, and hopefully some financial savings for us as well.
Thank you for that, Councillor Burnett, and that aspiration is an aspiration we have to work together with the third sector, to work together with the statutory partners to work together with our town and community councils, to work together with health police, our registered social landlords. And we've seen, haven't we, through the pandemic, how those relationships have been strengthened, and we need to maintain those strengthened relationships and build on them, because we've seen that that can deliver change and deliver change at extraordinary pace. And we will want to build on that in the future. And most importantly, working with the citizen, alongside the citizen, and that relationship has and is being recast, isn't it, to reflect that aspiration that we have. I'll bring in Councillor Smith next, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm Charles Smith. I'm the Cabinet Member for Education and Regeneration. I'd like to second Councillor Burnett, who has moved the adoption of the recommendations. And in seconding, I'd like to take the opportunity to underline what Jill said about the fact that performance indicators became automatically inoperative during this past very incredibly different and unusual 12 months. And really, there aren't any performance indicators that can adequately reflect what has been done, certainly in education. And I'd like to pay tribute to everyone in education, school leaders, the professionals, the teachers, the support staff, the parents, and most of all, the young people who've lived through this crisis, and we're not out of it yet. But my heart goes out to the young people who can't do the normal activities that young people expect to do, whether they're in school or out of school. Whatever challenges we've set week by week and sometimes day by day for the education sector in Bridgend, those challenges have been met superbly. And as I said earlier, there's no performance indicator that can adequately reflect that.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that, Councillor Smith. And that has been reflected right across the organisation. We've asked so much of our staff, and they've delivered each and every time we've asked of them, whether that be in social services, in finance, in housing. They've worked incredibly hard. They've worked evenings, weekends, and they've gone above and beyond to keep our most vulnerable citizens safe, and they continue to do that, because this pandemic is still here, and it still has a huge impact on every aspect of our lives. Councillor Patel, please.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to come in and say that I was also in support of this report. I think it's been challenging, and I'd like to thank the staff that actually pulled it together, because it is difficult to get something that's so cross-cutting together. And so I'd like to actually thank the team there that pulled it together and made it such an easy read. I think in terms of the content, like Councillor Burnett, the collaboration partnership feature for me really stands out. And I quite like the patterning of the performance indicators. I know it's not be all and end all, but I can see that we are hoping to go back to something that was a bit like prior the pandemic, so that's positive for me. And I can see that the environmental aspect is still a key feature, and ultimately that is the biggest challenge that we will be facing. So I'm glad to see that it's not forgotten in the corporate plan.
Vital point that you've made there, Councillor Patel, around our commitment to zero carbon, and that strategy that we have going forward. I'll bring the deputy leader in next, please.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Howard Williams, Deputy Leader. Yeah, well, you did mention it actually, Leader, your appreciation of all the staff across the authority. And I know this has been extraordinary 12 months that we've just witnessed, and full sort of gratification to all members of staff. They really have sort of stepped up here. They've undertaken roles that they probably not familiar to them. I know the finance team have worked extra hard to get over £30 million worth of grants to businesses that very much need it to be able to continue. And it really is a tribute to all staff across the authority that they've done a fabulous job. Thank you.
They have indeed, and I know that's a view shared by all members of the authority, and we can't say it enough really to our workforce. It's also important at this stage, and we do go through this process every year, don't we, Jill, of trying to prioritise the indicators that we use and the actions that we refer to, but also reminding readers of the plan that it is not a comprehensive and exhaustive list of everything we do, or indeed everything that is important to us, because if it was that, then it would be 1,000 pages long. So just because we are undertaking crucial work every day and across the county borough, from schools to social services to environmental health to homelessness, just because there is not explicit reference to that in the document, it does not mean that it is not important, it is not happening, and will not continue to happen every day. This is a reference to some of those areas where we are driving particular changes and our particular priorities for this year, but it does not for a minute mean that we are not also continuing with all the other vital support and services that we provide to the communities of the county borough.
No, that's absolutely right, Leader, and I think there's always been a misconception that if the service isn't included in the corporate plan, that it somehow diminishes its importance, and that's absolutely not the case. These are our key priorities, as you rightly say, the things that we want to drive forward and to measure the outcomes of very clearly, but that doesn't mean that we're not doing that for all the rest of the services which are encapsulated in the Directorate business plans. There's a whole plethora of plans that support the corporate plan, and we also have a full performance assessment process that looks at the outcomes from all those other services.
Thank you for that, Jill, and that's a very important point, that those services will be front and centre of other plans that we have within the authority. Councillor Young, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, with regard to the support for decarbonisation and environmental sustainability, as mentioned in the report there, I'd just like to point out that there are two particular schemes that are mentioned there. One is the Caerau Heat Network and the other one is the Bridgend Town Heat Network. There are other sort of peripheral writings around this regarding other areas that we're involved in to reduce our carbon footprint that are coming up. I'd just like to pay tribute to the very small team that has worked tirelessly on this to bring forward a strategy, a cohesive strategy, one of the first in Wales, if not the UK, and the ongoing work that is that is underpinning that strategy that is ongoing now. We have now launched our strategy. We have a strategic plan as to how we're going to take that forward. We have differing work streams which will feed into that. And one of the ways that we can feed into that as an organisation is to look at how we as an organisation are contributing to our carbon footprint and how we can reduce that carbon footprint in the long term. And I'd just like to assure Cabinet that that is actually being carried out as we speak. And so I just, finally to say, I just want to pay tribute to the small team that has worked very hard to bring this very, very good and innovative strategy forward. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Councillor Young, and of course we'll be receiving a Cabinet and a full Council report on one of the strands, of the many strands of that that work, and that's a good example of where the detail for the plan, because there's a huge amount of detail that sits under and alongside this plan, and that will be reported in different ways to members, but it does get reported. So that will be that's been reported to Cabinet on a regular basis, has it not, Councillor Young, the progress on both schemes, and we'll receive a further report on that shortly. And that is the same for all aspects of this plan. So on the same page of the plan, I can see reference to the 21st Century Schools modernisation programme, and of course members have received several reports on that, not only as Cabinet but as full Council, on Bambi of the scheme. So the plan is also a reflection of the decisions that have already been made and will be made by members of the authority. The recommendations have been moved and seconded. Is everyone in agreement with those recommendations, please?
Agreed, Leader.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jill, and thank you to Wanda as well, who's led on this work. And of course, I should have added and emphasised, if it's there, that the plan does not, it never sits on the shelf. It is reviewed on a quarterly basis, and it is not only reviewed by the Cabinet and Corporate Management Board, the progress that we're making. It is also a very important plan in terms of our regulatory framework and the regulators that, COVID or not, continue to inspect us and continue to hold us to account and measure our progress. And this is one of the first documents that, the first of many documents that our colleagues in CIW, in Estyn, in Audit Wales, it's one of the first documents that they will want to review, and that is why it's important that the plan is the right plan. Okay, we'll now move on to the medium-term financial strategy, 2021 to 2022 to 2024 to 2025. And again, this is a report of our Interim Chief Officer for Performance, Finance and Change, and our Section 151 Statutory Finance Officer, Jill, please.
Thank you, Leader. And for the purposes of the recording, Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. I have with me my Deputy 151 Officer, Deb Exton, today, and my thanks go to Deb and the team for all the hard work that's gone into producing all the reports that you have in front of you this afternoon. I'm sure Deb will join with me in answering any questions that you might have later. So the purpose of the report today is to present Cabinet with the medium-term financial strategy 21-22 to 24-25, which is attached at Annex 3, which includes a financial forecast for 21-25, a detailed revenue budget for 21-22, and the capital programme for 2021 to 2030-31, a 10-year capital programme. Corporate plan and the medium-term financial strategy identify the Council's service and resource priorities for the next 4 financial years, but obviously there's particular focus on the budget for 21-22 and the corporate plan for 21-22. The NTFS supports the 3 wellbeing objectives and identifies resource priorities for the next 4 years. It focuses on how the Council intends to respond to the forecasted public sector funding reductions as a result of ongoing austerity and increasing pressure on public sector services, which have been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. It also sets out the approaches and principles the Council will follow to ensure the Council remains financially sustainable and delivers on its corporate wellbeing objectives. So just to remind Cabinet, the Council is required to approve a balanced budget for the following financial year and to set the Council tax rates for the county borough. This report sets out proposals to achieve that objective and contribute towards a sustainable position in the medium term. It's important to note the impact of COVID on the financial position of the Council and the additional cost pressures that have come with it, and you'll have heard me talk about those throughout the year, along with a significant loss of income. And I think it's fair to say both central government and Welsh Government have played a significant role in mitigating a large proportion of these losses through various funding streams, most notably the COVID Hardship Fund. And while some of them are not recurrent, there are a number that will require longer term funding as new ways of working are embedded into the Council's business as usual. And those are reflected in the NTFS you have before you today. The announcement of the final local government settlement for 21-22 is about 2 months later than previous years due to the delay in the comprehensive spending review and as a result of the COVID pandemic. So the final settlement is not due to be announced until the 2nd of March 2021, and you'll recall that this happened last year as well, not quite so late for the draft. As a result, the budget that you have in front of you today is proposed on the basis of the provisional settlement received in December 2020. We're not anticipating any significant change in funding between the provisional and the final settlement, but any changes obviously will be reported back to Council at a later date. But it's not envisaged that the changes would impact upon Council tax. So the Council's approach to meeting its responsibilities under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act are set out in 7.3 of the cover report. And the report also outlines the financial issues that the Council is requested to consider as part of the NTFS. As 151, I'm expected to report annually on the robustness of the level of reserves. The level of reserves is sufficient at the moment to protect the Council in the light of unknown demands or emergencies and current funding levels. But I think you would expect me to emphasise at this point that the biggest financial risk to the Council is the uncertainty and I think we'll be living with that for some time. The uncertainty of Welsh Government funding to mitigate the effects of COVID, increased difficulty in delivering planned budget reductions, and also the identification of further proposals over the MTFS period that I'll touch on in a minute. So it is imperative that the council fund balance is managed in accordance with MTFS Principle 9. You've heard me talk about this again previously, and it's essential that revenue, service expenditure and capital expenditure is contained within budgets. I'm also expected to report to council if I don't believe there's sufficient resource to discharge my role as required by Section 114 of the Local Government Act 88. At the current time, members should note there is sufficient resource to discharge this role. The budget includes estimates that take into account circumstances and events which exist or are reasonably foreseeable at the time of preparing the budget. And I've probably in all my career never been in a position that's so uncertain in terms of reasonably foreseeable at the time of preparing the budget. It's been prepared following consultation with members, the school budget forum and service managers, and subject to the risks identified, it provides a firm basis for managing the council's resources for the year 21-22 and beyond. There are 3 annexes attached to the cover report, and I'll just briefly touch on some key highlights. Annex 1 is the Equality Impact Assessment. Annex 2 shows how the MTFS meets the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and Annex 3 is the MTFS itself. So I'll just take you briefly through the MTFS. It's split into 5 sections for ease of reference. So Section 1 covers the aims and purpose, principles and overview, and articulates really how the council plans to use its resources to support the achievement of its wellbeing objectives and statutory duties. It covers the principles that will govern the strategy and a 4-year financial forecast. It covers the capital programme linked to priority areas, and it covers the corporate risk assessment. And you'll see that over the last 10 years, the council has made £68 million of budget reductions, and that's shown at chart 1 at 131, and that's 25% of the council's current budget. That's no mean feat. The council's funding comes from a variety of sources. The majority, as you'll know, comes through the Welsh Government, through RSG and a share of non-domestic rates. And the council supplements this through council tax collection, other grants, fees and charges. And the council tax is made up of 3 elements: the council charge, the community council charge, and the police and crime commissioner charge. And it now funds approximately 30% of the budget. The quarterly reports to Cabinet on the revenue position for 2021 have outlined in detail the impact of the budget on the additional cost pressures and the loss of income faced by the council throughout the year as a result of the pandemic. And as I've said previously, Welsh Government has played a significant role in mitigating the majority of these losses. However, Cabinet and Council will now need to consider the longer term impact of the pandemic and how it will shape the restart, recover and renew for all our services. Budget planning for 21-22 has been even more uncertain than usual due to the pandemic, on top of the uncertainties around the end of the Brexit transition period. And whilst on the whole, the UK and Welsh Government have been supportive and covered most of the directly incurred costs, it's not clear how much of the loss of income and additional cost pressures will be covered going forward. And that's some of the uncertainty and some of the issues that we will be grappling with next year. Loss of income, leisure, car parking, rental income, for example, may be a medium-term problem. We also think that there'll be an additional call on council tax reduction in view of the inevitable economic impact. And the level of council tax collection is continuing to fall. Ongoing expenditure on matters relating to public health, test, trace and protect, PPE, all these things that we never dreamt about until this year. Arrangements for the public vaccination programme, additional COVID enforcement, as well as other expectations, including addressing homelessness more robustly and supporting social care sustainably, are likely to be significant. So in these circumstances, setting the balanced budget for 21-22 has been very challenging. Section 2 sets out the context of the MTFS and some key financial and non-financial statistics, and just a few things to draw Cabinet's attention to in this section. The projected net position for the year end is an underspend at the moment of 691k as shown in table 2. And I think due to the COVID pandemic, the position during this financial year has been incredibly fluid and relies very heavily on securing additional funding from the Welsh Government. The Directorate position has improved significantly since Q2, and it's hoped that that will continue to improve during the remainder of the financial year. In terms of the reserves, the council fund balance has steadily risen over the last 10 years to its current value of just over 9 million. That's set out in table 4, and that represents just over 3% of the net revenue budget, or 5.27% of the net revenue budget excluding schools. Now you'll recall me saying that the magic figure that we aim for is around 5% of the net budget, and so we are still managing to achieve that. Table 5 sets out the main findings from the budget consultation, Fit for the Future, and gives members some really helpful findings on our services for the future. In addition to the public consultation, Cabinet and CMB have been working obviously with the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel over the last 6 months to facilitate the budget planning process. And the draft budget report approved by Cabinet in January has also been scrutinised by the Council's scrutiny committees, resulting in a report to Cabinet on the 9th of February from the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, outlining a number of recommendations. Cabinet has considered those recommendations, which include the recommendations from BREP, and a response to these is provided at Appendix A. Any changes to service provision are set out in detail in 2.4. Section 3 sets out the economic context and the financial climate. As I said, the late announcement of the comprehensive spending review made the Welsh Government decide to defer the announcement of their draft budget. So Bridgen's draft medium-term financial strategy was presented to Cabinet on the 19th of January, and that was based on the provisional settlement before being submitted to scrutiny. The provisional settlement was an increase in funding of 4.3%, which was obviously a much better settlement than we were anticipating. And as I say, the final settlement will be received on the 2nd of March. The headline figure was an overall increase of 3.8 across Wales. So for Bridgend at 4.3%, we were actually a net gainer in that regard. So as I say, a better settlement than anticipated. 3.3 sets out our forecast financial position, and members will note that we've revised our planning assumptions, but unfortunately it's still predicted that we'll require about £22 million of budget reductions over the MTFS period. The Council's corporate risk assessment identifies the key corporate risks and the mitigating actions, and that's attached at Appendix B. And that's been regularly reviewed during the financial year and has been scrutinised on a number of occasions by the Governance and Audit Committee. Section 4 sets out the revenue budget for 21-22. That's set out in Table 9, with more details shown in Table 10 and the funding of the budget in Table 11. The one issue I want to draw Cabinet's attention to is the significant increase in pressures facing the Council. They're set out in Appendix C. They total 7.5 million recurring for 21-22, with a further 7 million for future years. So those pressures are going to become very significant in terms of balancing our budget going forwards. Appendix D sets out the budget reduction proposals for 21-22. Appendix E, the fees and charges, and F and G give you all the detail on the directorate budgets. 4.2 sets out the capital programme for 21-22 to 2030-31 and the capital financing. And that's obviously been developed in line with the principles and the Council's capital strategy that's on the agenda later today. It reflects the Welsh Government's capital settlement for 21-22, and as you will know, you receive regular reports on the capital programme, which also go to Council. At 426, you will note any changes to be built into the programme since Council. Not very many of them, because we last reported to Council in January 2021. But the revised capital programme is set out in Appendix H. So at 4.3, the position on the Council's reserves is set out with the reserves and balances protocol at Appendix I. And those principles are used to assess the adequacy of reserves. I know we've had questions on that in the past, but that appendix sets out very clearly the protocols for our reserves and the arrangements for monitoring reserves. It also sets out the forecast movement between 2021 and 21-22. At paragraph 4.4, that sets out the position on council tax. The 21-22 final revenue budget shown in Table 10 includes a council tax increase of 3.9%, as proposed in the draft MTFS report to Cabinet in January 2021. That's lower than the proposed increase of 4.5% that was included in the budget consultation and reflects the views of the majority of respondents who were in favour of only increasing council tax slightly or up to 4.5% to protect services. Section 5 sets out the longer term considerations for the MTFS, some of which are certain, but as I've said earlier on this afternoon, many of which are uncertain. And the longer term outlook's not intended to be a 10-year budget strategy in the same way that the MTFS is for the next 4 years, because there are so many political, financial, social and economic variables, it wouldn't be possible to forecast accurately for the next 10 years' time, but it does provide a financial framework for members to reference against. It focuses on the long-term financial outlook, cost pressures, potential risks, major timelines for key contracts, and all sorts of other economic factors that will affect the financial health of the organisation. And we've tried to set out the future sources of funding, the future cost pressures, and the Council's strategy to meet those challenges. So we hope that the MTFS as a whole helps members in continuing to manage the financial position in the period of uncertainty going forward. So that completes the summary of the MTFS this afternoon. For Cabinet, I'll take you to the recommendations at 9.1.
Thanks so much for that, Jill. A very comprehensive report, of course, once again from you and a very small team. So very warm welcome to the Deputy Section 151 Finance Officer, Deb Exton. Huge amount of work once again has gone into this strategy. And I'll now ask the Deputy Leader to come in. Deputy Leader, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, Councillor Howell-Williams, the Deputy Leader. And I first have a question for Deputy 151 Officer Leader, and then I'll offer some observations on the report. So can I first ask, has there been any alternative budget presented for the authority to consider?
Shall I pick that up, Deputy Leader?
Yes.
Yeah. No, Councillor Williams, no, we haven't received. Last Friday was the deadline for any such proposal of an alternative budget, and I didn't receive anything in writing by close of play last Friday, so I have assumed that there is no alternative budget because we didn't receive anything.
Okay, thank you, Jill, for that confirmation. So therefore, then we are to consider what's the information that's in front of us. Leader, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on the observations from the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel and the scrutiny process, because they've spent a huge amount of time looking at all the information, and you know, we very much value their input, and I think even though we've got a written sort of response there, I think it's only fair that we sort of we go through that and offer some feedback to them, because their input is very much appreciated. So if I start with the 7 recommendations from the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel, and you'll see from the report that we accept all 7 recommendations. But as far as recommendation 4 goes, I just offer a little bit of sort of caution there, if I may, because we do value the independence of the BREP process. And whilst we are very happy to work and sort of work along a more thematic approach for tasking BREP, I think that independent nature of the panel is very important. So we will give that some consideration, and we're happy to work with you. But as I said, all 7 recommendations have largely been accepted, and we thank you for your time that you've offered on that. If I turn now to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee representations. There are 14 recommendations in total there, and the first recommendation, we all lobby very hardly to the Welsh Government. We try to ensure that we get our fair share of the budget that comes from there, and I must say we've got a very good working relationship currently with Welsh Government, and we're very much appreciative of the support that they've given us, and you know that is reflected in the settlement. And I'm sure all monies that we receive from Welsh Government we can spend to the benefit of the residents of the county borough. regarding recommendation number 2, and that is about explaining the cost of services to the public. Well, I think the amount of information we've got before us this afternoon, that it's where we try to strike that balance, I think. And if we can do that better in a more open and transparent way, we certainly will. And what I have committed to do is to sort of look at other authorities and see what information they provide, and see then if we can sort of improve on our offer of the information that we make available for members of the public. Regarding recommendation 3 and the notion that we've had a flat cash budget, and I accept that we've had a good settlement, but our pressures have been unprecedented this year. And so even if we have a flat cash, the same money as last year, because of the challenges of our demographics and the increases in the demands on our services, you know, we have had unprecedented pressures this year that we've needed to deal with. So you know, we are working on that. Regarding then recommendation 4, that is completely agreed, and we're happy to accept that, as is recommendation 5. Recommendation 6, that was the recommendation about the education psychology provision. We have listened to the scrutiny process on that, and we are prepared to move that to next year, and so we'll take some further information, and that can be part of the MTFS process going forward. So regarding 7, that is the CAT recommendation in the for the budget reduction, COM 1. I think 7 and 8 can be taken together. Now then, I think it's important that we keep that £300,000 target in there. But what we are making very clear that this will not affect children's play areas. In fact, we are increasing our investment in children's play areas, and we see that as a very important aspect of our provision for outdoor activity. So recommendation 9, that is, we always welcome constructive scrutiny. And the opportunity to review the CAT process will be part of that constructive, it's always a very invigorating process going before the scrutiny, and we certainly welcome that to continue. Recommendation 10. There was a comprehensive review of fees and charges back in 2016, and we have agreed that it is now appropriate that we look at this again. I have looked at this informally, and you know, it's many of our fees and charges are set outside of our control. This Welsh Government set the fees largely in social services collection and in planning fees. But there are some fees that we can have some influence over, and we will look at that. And of course, the pandemic has meant that we've had to actually help some businesses, and the rents that we've for our market traders and for our commercial premises have been waived over the past year. So we have supported many of our tenants. But we will look at that and come back with a refreshed structure for next year. Recommendation 11, that was the pest control. So that we have listened to the scrutiny process, and we have removed that, and there will be a further cabinet report to agree a way forward on this service area. So that takes me to recommendation 12, and that is around the safe routes to school. We are awaiting the outcome of the Welsh Government review on homeschool transport, and as soon as we are in receipt of that review, we will set up a working group, and we will review our position, and if we are able to make a small investment for safe routes, then this will be progressed. Recommendation 13. Now, I know there was a lot of talk in the scrutiny process about the use of consultants, and you know, it's all I can say on that is that sometimes it is advisable to keep us safe that we take expert opinion on a very specialist area from time to time that we just do not hold in-house. So you know, but we will review that process, and you know, if we can make any savings there, then we certainly will. But you know, that is something that we will have a close look at. And then finally, on recommendation 14, I mean, I think if we go back to the previous report, really, it is a corporate principle that we target resources at those in greatest need, and you know, the COVID has propelled us to a place that was sort of unimaginable 12 months ago. We are working completely different now to what we were then, and when restrictions allow, I'm sure we will have a debate to decide on what we need to do going forward, because I know we have been changed, and our working practices will never return completely to how they were previously. So we are quite happy to accept that, and we will certainly have a debate on how we can support the local communities. So thank you for that opportunity to make those observations. And again, I very much, all Cabinet members very much welcome the input that we've had from the scrutiny process. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you for that, Deputy Leader. That was a really helpful overview of the recommendations of that committee. Can I just check with Jill as the Section 1515 Finance Officer, if since these recommendations were made, since the report was published last week, if you've received any further representations from members at all? Any members made any representations to you?
Not since sorry, through you, Leader. Not since the report, since the papers were published, no.
Last week, okay. I think it's important to stress that some of these are around the process by which we set the budget, about how we, and the medium-term financial strategy, how we interact with Welsh Government, and the organisation, and some are obviously, so the first one being a case in point is around how we try to influence Welsh Government about financial commitments, and some of it's about information. There are some specific recommendations from COSC around some of the proposals and the actual budget and the medium-term financial strategy. And as the Deputy Leader has outlined, we have responded specifically to them, and we've responded in the positive. So, for example, pest control, the committee had concerns about the complete loss of the pest control service, and we as Cabinet have had similar concerns, and we've now reflected that in the medium-term financial strategy, and that was one of a number of examples where we have taken on board the recommendations of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and all the committees and all the members, and that is reflected in the budget that we have before us today, and a budget that, if it's approved this afternoon, will be presented to members tomorrow. We've also listened to them around escorts and school buses. We've also and will take into account the point that they made about the educational psychology service. So we have listened to members as best as we can, and that process has been ongoing. Can you remind us, Jill, about when we first started to meet and discuss the medium-term financial strategy? Obviously, we've had several meetings, have we not, with members? But this budget is not being created overnight. It is a process that began some time ago, and this is a manifestation of that. But it is not a new document. It is a document, and it contains proposals that have been seen several times by members of this authority in different forums.
Thank you, Leader. It's an annual cycle, as we know, and Cabinet will recall that it's April when I come to you with the timetable for the next budget, having just set the budget in March generally, or the end of February, beginning of March. So it starts in April. The first BREP meeting is usually either May or June, that starts articulating the work programme and goes through the proposals. There's obviously lots of input from both the budget monitoring process that goes on all year, plus the capital programme, and information that's contained within those reports, and then individual scrutiny committees obviously can ask for information on different reports or different subjects to do with the budget or the medium-term financial strategy, and then obviously it's all presented to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as was this year a whole scrutiny committee where everybody was invited, or it would be presented to the different subject scrutiny committees depending on the timing. So it went through two successive COSCs where all members were invited and had an opportunity to ask questions of ourselves and directors on service issues.
Thanks for that, Jill. Councillor Young, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Councillor Richard Young, Cabinet Member for Communities. It's a question to the Session 151 officer, Jill, if I may. We're announcing today that a proposed council tax increase of 3.9%, which was a better situation now than we were when we originally looked at this. We were looking at originally 4.5. So it's a more pleasing situation than it was, although any increase in council tax is not welcomed by the residents at large. I understand that, but we have to live in a realistic situation. I was just wondering, I know that you're in contact with other Section 151 officers in authorities throughout Wales. I was just wondering what is happening throughout Wales? Where do we sit with the figure that we're announcing today? Are we above average? Are we top of the scale? Are we bottom? What are the rest of the Welsh authorities doing? Can you help me with that?
I can help to a certain extent, Councillor Young, but obviously I'm not privy to final information, mainly because some councils won't have their council meeting until the beginning of March, the very beginning of March, or indeed in days after this one. It's the 23rd of February. There are another 5 days in February. There will be council meetings ongoing, and until the rate is actually set and the budget approved, it's very difficult to make that judgment. My sense from the conversations previously is that we're certainly by no means the highest, and we probably wouldn't be necessarily the lowest. So my sense is that most councils would be in the same sort of area, but I obviously won't know that until obviously the budgets have been agreed, as with our own.
Yes, appreciate the difficulty, but as a ballpark figure, we're probably about the average, and thank you for that. That's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Young. It's a question that's often asked quite legitimately by members and members of the public, and I'm sure you can confirm, though, Jill, that every local authority in Wales where there have been plans published, or the figure has been published, there are plans to increase the council tax right across Wales, isn't there?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yes, all the draft budgets proposed a council tax increase, and you will recall me saying previously that to go with a very low council tax, tempting as it might be, means that you lose a lot of your resource for future years, and therefore you have to double the increase to get yourselves back into the same sort of ballpark. So I think you've heard me say that before. I would always be cautioning against going in with very, very low council tax unless the settlement was such that it enabled you to do that.
Thank you, Jill. Can I ask two questions? The first is around those people, because some people do struggle, obviously, to pay council tax. Can you remind, I can see that there are some members listening to today's meeting. Can you remind colleagues about the support that is available to people who find that their financial circumstances have changed, and sometimes it's changed overnight as a result of the pandemic, but there is a scheme in place called the Council Tax Reduction Scheme, and there's other ways that we support residents. And I know those people that sadly have experienced extreme hardship as a result of losing their job or falling income, and they will be often eligible for that additional support, and will be able to apply for council tax reduction. And also my second question, I should have added, there's a second question, was around, and you have largely covered it, but of course, you could have spent hours, couldn't you, talking to this report? So I wasn't expecting you to give detail on each and every line, but a question just about the reserves, and your confirmation that the reserves, which of course we consider on a regular basis, the reserves that are proposed, they are reserves that, in your professional opinion and judgment as our Section 151 officer, are the right level of reserves given the level of risk that we are facing, and it is important to maintain those level of reserves, given that we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and whether the risks that you referred to earlier are unprecedented in your career and any of our officers' careers, I am sure. Thank you, Jill.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Yeah, there are two things really in terms of council tax. Obviously, those who are liable for council tax, we've obviously made a lot of amendments this year to try and help people wherever possible. So spreading the cost over the 12 months, or what I call back ending. So instead of paying the first 10 months, paying the last 10 months. We put those in place quite early, and we make every attempt to talk to anybody that phones us with difficulties about payment plans or how we can best help them. If, however, they are in real, obviously financial difficulties, then obviously they would then be eligible. If they're on universal credit, they would be eligible for council tax reduction. Either a percentage or the full 100% back, and there are plenty of safety nets in place for in terms of the benefits system to enable people to access whatever they can have in the way of assistance. So we do take quite a personal approach to make sure that we understand people's circumstances and try and help wherever possible. Obviously, we can't always give people what they, what they had previously, and so there will unfortunately be people that will fall into universal credit inevitably as a result of the pandemic, and we'll just try and support as much as possible through council tax reduction and anything else that's available. Sorry, the second question on the reserves. I touched on this in the presentation. Deb can come in if there's anything that you want that I don't answer. We've got the council has about £64.5 million in revenue reserves, which on the face of it looks to anybody that hasn't read the detail as if it's usable, and it's usable in a way that is earmarked. Generally, there's about 9.34 million in the council fund, and that's the MTFS principle that I referred to earlier, which is a sort of single figure number of days running costs of the council, and you would be rash to take that council fund below the 5% that I've talked about, and in fact that is our MTFS principle. And then of the earmarked reserves, the 55 million, 20 million of those are supporting the capital programme, another 5 million supporting asset management and minor works. The COVID fund that we set up was 3 million, and there's grants of 4 million that obviously you can't spend grants on anything else. So they're there for a purpose. They have terms and conditions that come with them. And if we don't carry out what's expected with that grant, we would need to repay it. And that's not a position we want to be in either. And then the rest, the other 12 million is major claims, service reconfiguration, insurance, and funding for redundancies, which from time to time we do get. And we try and minimise those, but obviously if you make a quarter of your revenue costs in savings, then you're going to end up with some not necessarily redundancies that compulsory redundancies, but obviously not compulsory redundancies. So that's basically where our reserves are, and whilst it says usable, they're usable because they need to be used for the purposes intended. Sorry, that was quite long-winded.
No, it wasn't long-winded at all. It was comprehensive, and it needs to be comprehensive. And finally, from me, Jill, wanted to ask, and I know the answer to this, but I think it's important people hear it, that Audit Wales and our auditors will carefully consider the level of reserves, and if those reserves were excessive, they would certainly share that judgment with us. And indeed, in the past, they've recommended that our general reserve fund is enhanced, if you like, because of the level of risk, and that is something that they carefully look at every year, is our level of reserves, don't they, Jill? So it's not something that we can simply decide in a vacuum. It is something that we have to very carefully think about.
Yeah, Leader, they look at it as part of the final accounts and review all our earmarked reserves, and they'd be the first to comment if we had earmarked reserves that weren't for a purpose. It's one of the tests that they do. We review those very, very regularly in detail quarterly and report that as part of the budget monitoring. They also have done a piece of work on financial sustainability in the last year, and they reported favourably on our approach to financial sustainability, and they also looked at our general reserve, the council tax fund, which I've referred to a couple of times this afternoon, to make sure that it's more than 5%. They don't set the 5%. SIPFA set that as a benchmark some years ago, and most councils try and work to round about that figure. They're also doing a second piece of work on financial sustainability at the moment, so they will be looking at the effect of COVID. They'll be looking at this MTFS to make sure that we've taken a prudent approach to the uncertainty that lies ahead, and they're doing that right across the 22 councils in Wales. And you will recall that one council that decided to use reserves to help them to sustain their revenue position ended up with commissioners involved in the council and a letter from the Auditor General. And that's not something I'm sure that Cabinet want to receive.
No, it's not a position any member would want to be in, and it's incumbent upon all members to ensure that we set a balanced budget. That's our legal responsibility, isn't it, Jill? It's not just a responsibility for you. It's not just a responsibility for Cabinet members. It's a responsibility for all members. I'm looking to see if anyone else wanted to come in. Councillor Patel, please.
Thank you, Leader. Sorry, it looks like I'm in the dark. These backgrounds. Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'd like to speak in support of the MTFS. I've listened to what's been said, and I think there are three reasons that I mainly would like to support it. One is that all members have had the opportunity to review and make any suggestions, and therefore I feel that the process was inclusive of elected members. I also know that the consultation went out, the budget consultation, and therefore we've solicited public opinion on what goes into our budget and have made the necessary amendments to the budget, which is in line with what the public have told us. So that for me satisfies that test. And then also I'd like to highlight the Wellbeing and Future Generations assessment, which is in one of the appendices. And I think what this says to me is what the vision behind the budget is. And, you know, there's things around improving educational outcomes, creating cohesive, safe communities, and, you know, breaking the cycle for breaking the long-term cycles to secure better outcomes for residents, a healthier, a more active community. Volunteering is mentioned, reducing the travel time, increasing the awareness of green spaces, improving physical and mental health. So I think that for me really does say what we as a cabinet would like to get from this budget. And so put those three things together, and I'd like to kind of support it as well, basically.
Thanks so much for that contribution, Councillor Patel, and really important that you've highlighted the consultation responses as well, and that public engagement that's taken place. Councillor Smith is next, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'd like to second Councillor Patel and approve the recommendations in the MTFS. I'd like to thank Jill and Howell for a very comprehensive and professional explanation of all the detail. I'd like to thank the many backbench local members who have taken part in a whole host of committees over many months and put in very helpful suggestions and asked very pertinent questions. And as Denisha said, I'd like to thank the public who took part in the consultation. Two figures which Jill mentioned stick in my mind. One, she mentioned that council tax makes up only 30% of our budget. And in the public mind, I think there is a misapprehension that it makes up 100% of our budget. But if I say that, I can't remember the exact percentage, but education alone swallows up all that 30% and more. That puts it into a bit of perspective. So thanks from education for helping us protect that service. We can't protect all services, because the other stat which Jill gave us was that we've still got to make £22 million worth of cuts as things stand now, because austerity isn't quite over just yet. But again, thanks to Jill and her team. I think it's remarkable the way they take us through all these complexities, and the way that they understand the workings of central government and how they can lead us through them. Thanks to everyone involved.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Smith. I'm sure we'd all echo that. The way that you make a very complex budget simpler to understand, Jill, is a real skill, Jill and Deborah and the Deputy Leader. And I too would like to thank members for the backbench members, all members, for the constructive way that they've engaged in this process so far, and that's since the spring of last year, actually. Councillor Burnett is next, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I am fully supportive of this MTFS strategy. I know the amount of work that's been put in by everybody, and last year I was sitting on the BRET process before my appointment to Cabinet, so I do know the contributions and the valuable conversations that are put forward at that time. And I feel that, you know, we really do allow members to explore all options, and they have the directors at their disposal during that time to allow them to ask whatever questions we want. So I'm very confident that we are as transparent and cooperative as possible to ensure that this process goes smoothly. With regard to my own portfolio, I just want to thank the staff as well, and directors for managing. We've got huge pressures on social services and within early help, but I'm confident that the cuts that we're making actually are a result of flipping round how we work, and our new outcome-based models which focus on individuals and give better provision for them, at the same time allow us to make savings. Potentially, it would be nice if those savings could be put back into the Social Services Directorate for future projects, but that can't happen at the moment. But I think everybody's done a marvellous job at securing and strengthening our Social Services Directorate in particular.
Thank you for that, Councillor Burnett. And it's very important that we remind ourselves of that focus on the most vulnerable citizens in the borough, and how does this plan protect those citizens that we support, and many of those citizens are citizens that Social Services and Wellbeing Department provide a lifeline to, and ensure that they maintain their independence in the community. And this financial strategy is focused on ensuring that support is continued in the future. I know that every cabinet member has spoken now on this strategy, and Deputy Leader, you've moved the recommendations. Do I have a seconder?
Right.
And is everyone in agreement with the recommendations that have been moved?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and of course we will discuss this at full council tomorrow. The recommendation is that it is obviously presented as is to full council. And I would also a final thank you to councillors Martin Jones, Green, Blundell and Gifford for their role as chair of BREP and the 3 scrutiny committees. I know closely they've been involved in this process as well. The next report is on the Treasury Management and Capital Strategies, and this once again is a report of our interim Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change. Jen, please.
Thank you, Leader. These are the final reports this afternoon. For the purposes of the recording, Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. So the purpose of the report in front of you this afternoon is to present to the Cabinet the Council's Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22, and that's set out at Appendix A. And that incorporates the borrowing and investment strategies for 21 and 22, and the Treasury Management indicators for the period 21-22 to 23-24, and the Capital Strategy 21-22 to 2030-31, which is set out at Appendix B. The Capital Strategy also includes the prudential indicators and the annual minimum revenue provision statement for 21-22 that you will have received previously. So if I start, Leader, with the Treasury Management Strategy, and I'm sure Cabinet will be aware that the Council's Treasury Management activities are regulated very strongly by the Local Government Act, and the strategy is compiled in accordance with regulations, codes of practice and indeed Welsh Government guidance. And the content of the strategy is very much consistent to previous years, but I would like to draw focus to the key changes year on year. So section 2 reflects the current economic background, and in particular the holding of interest rates by the Bank of England at 0.1%. You'll recall me bringing reports where on the budget monitoring strategy that actually said that we were actually having to pay to invest our money at one point in time. We have obviously got interest rates now at 0.1%, and our advisors are saying that they expect that rate to remain the same until the first quarter of 2024. But obviously there's so much uncertainty, we don't obviously rely on that, but that's a very good indicator. But the impact of both the pandemic and the exit from the European Union may well influence policy, and so further reduction to zero or even negative rates can't be ruled out again in the future. Section 2 of the strategy sets out the Council's debt and investment position as at 31st of December 2020, and further detail on the maturity of the Council's long-term debt has been included as a chart at the top of page 5 of the strategy. I think that's page 219 of the reports pack. And that provides greater detail on the Council's current debt profile. Table 2 sets out the Council's forecast need to borrow, taking into account the capital programme and the reserves available in the short term to fund such expenditure. The use of reserves, as you've heard me say a number of times, in the short term is both prudent and cost effective, but obviously as our reserves reduce, the need to borrow increases. And it's important to note that the need to borrow will change depending on the spending within the capital programme, and that will be closely monitored throughout the year. You've been used to receiving reports on that previously, and that's not going to change in the year in question 21-22. And at the moment, our capital programme is pretty much fully subscribed. We've got limited opportunity to raise funds through capital receipts. There's still some opportunities in terms of redevelopment, Porthcawl, Park Avon, Iweni, but other than that, our forecast is that we will need to borrow to finance our capital programme. So that brings me to one important change to the terms of borrowing from what the Public Works Loan Board, where we borrow an awful lot of our money. It is a primary source of borrowing for councils, and that's reflected in section 4, the borrowing strategy. The section 151 office is required to certify that the council's capital programme does not include any intention to purchase investment assets primarily for financial reward for the current and the next 2 financial years. So that's for 3 years. So, and that's irrespective of how the purchase would be funded. So, for example, buying a property purely to benefit from the rent returns and the capital appreciation rather than service delivery. Now that's a really important change, and I just want to make sure that Cabinet have understood the implications of such a change, because if we were to do anything that involved investing purely for yield, you'll have heard me say security, liquidity and then yield. So we've always been prudent anyhow, but if we were to invest purely for yield, it would prevent us borrowing for any purpose. So we would put in jeopardy our Band B programme and others because of wish to borrow for yields. So you'll be hearing more about that in the future, and each capital scheme will have to be judged on its merit against those principles. So it is a very important change. Obviously, it's because many local authorities went into commercial ventures, and obviously that's caused the Public Works Loans Board to change their rules. Table 6 on page 226 reflects a change in the limit of investments in money market funds. This is another change. They're a key tool for the council investing cash resources, especially when managing grants in relation to COVID from Welsh Government. And our advisors have removed the overall limit of investments in those funds, which we had increased to 30 million in November. But we would still not invest above 6 million in any one fund. So that's another change to the strategy. And then the final change is at table 12, page 233 of your pack, and that's to increase the limit on lending to another entity. And the proposed increase is from 1 million to 2 million. And this is to support the proposed loan to a special purpose vehicle for the delivery of the Bridgend Town Heat Network. So if I turn to the capital strategy at Appendix B, and the capital strategy provides a high-level overview of how capital expenditure financing and treasury management activity contribute to the provision of services. It's a policy framework document, and it links to the corporate plan, the MTFS, the treasury management strategy, and the council's asset management plan. And the strategy informs decisions on capital spending priorities within the council's 10-year capital programme. So very briefly, it sets out what is capital expenditure and investment and why we incur it. It sets out the council's overall capital objectives, priorities and plans. It sets out how the council's capital expenditure and investment will be funded and resourced, how the council's capital expenditure and investment plans will be appraised, how capital plans will be approved, monitored and reported upon, and also the skills and knowledge required to deliver the capital plans. So obviously that strategy needs to be read in conjunction with the council's treasury management strategy, which contains the investment strategy and borrowing strategy and the MRP statement. So they're all very closely linked, as you will have heard me say previously. Again, much of the context of the capital strategy is similar to previous years, but there are a number of changes just to draw your attention to. The first is on accounting for leases. This is about changing the way that leases are accounted for, and it will have quite a significant impact on the capital strategy. Current operating leases, where costs are charged to revenue, will have to be brought onto the balance sheet as a right of use asset. As a result of the coronavirus pandemic, the implementation of this change has been delayed till 22-23 financial year, and consequently the impact is still under review. But we've flagged it up because it's something that should have happened next year, but we'll bring further information back to Cabinet. Borrowing for commercial activities, I've just taken you through that as a condition of borrowing from the PWLB. We've got to confirm that there's no intention, and I personally have to confirm that on each and every occasion, otherwise the council, and indeed if I was with a different council, would be prevented from borrowing. And then finally, some recommendations from internal audit. Following an internal audit review of capital expenditure and feasibility studies. This is something that was raised by members, certainly through Cabinet and at Council. And the strategy has been strengthened by requiring a detailed feasibility assessment of capital projects. So that's added at section 5 of the document you have in front of you, and also the need for post-project evaluation to learn from best practice at section 5.3. So hopefully by implementing those recommendations, some of the issues around feasibility work and post-project evaluation will be strengthened. So that was all I was proposing to say on those two documents. Leader, I take you to the recommendations at 9.1.
Thank you for that, Jill. I'll bring the Deputy Leader in, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And yeah, Councillor Howell Williams, Deputy Leader. I'm happy to move the report, but I do have a couple of observations, I suppose. The one regarding the extension from 1 million to 2 million for to allow support for a special purpose vehicle. I think what I would like to say on that is that even though this allows us to lend money up to £2 million, that doesn't mean that we will without sound justification, and the reasons for that will be very clearly set out in any supporting report, and that report then will go before Cabinet or Council and will be subjected to the usual scrutiny process. So no, there will need to be very, very sound justification for that level of borrowing. The other item I'm particularly interested in is the feasibility assessments, because I know we have debated this quite frequently in the past, and you know, it's getting that right feasibility assessment, that balance, I suppose, about you know how much resource you front load the project, as opposed to how much resource you keep in a contingency, and sort of I think that may be just worth a comment. There is what sort of level of detail will be required for that feasibility assessment assessment.
Okay, thanks for that, Deputy Leaders. Important points to raise. Do you want to respond to any of those, Jill?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think the Treasury Management Strategy amendment in terms of our ability to lend and the SPV, there will be a report coming forward in March on that, so I won't comment any further on that. And in terms of feasibility, I think this has been debated a number of times in terms of what's the appropriate level for feasibility. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to find until you actually put the proverbial spade, I guess, in the soil. And we've had numerous schemes where things have come to light as a result of work, and that's not uncommon. That is what happens, you know, very frequently when anybody, both privately and in public organisations, has work done. So the intention of the recommendations from internal audit is to strengthen the link between feasibility wherever possible and the cost and the and the effectiveness of the work, and also, as I say, the recommendations were very much in terms of making sure that we learn lessons from the schemes as we go forward. So that was all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jill, and I'm pleased that both you and the Deputy Leader have highlighted that change, because it is a change that has reflected, as you have indicated, Jill, the concern and desire of members that we undertake more feasibility work, or more detailed feasibility work. It is it's an aim we share, and I'm pleased that that is now part of the strategy. However, it is not going to eliminate, is it, the changes that are often experienced in terms of capital projects once a spade is put into the ground, because every capital project is unique, is different, and it does mean that it's difficult to make projections about the costs of projects that are 100% accurate. But those feasibility studies will help us in terms of forecasting, predicting, and managing those costs. Though sometimes there's a requirement, isn't there, to carry out works urgently. So it's a principle we support, but it may not be possible in a small number of cases to undertake that that feasibility work. Councillor Young, I can see that you've indicated and want to come in, and then I'll bring Janine in then, please.
Yeah, Councillor Richard Young, Cabinet Member for Communities. Just to confirm, as the Section 151 officer has just said, that there will be a Cabinet report with regard to the Bridgend Heat Network SPV coming to Cabinet in March, and in that report, a full justification for the loan will be outlined.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Young. Janine, please.
Thank you, Leader. For the recording, I'm Janine Nightingale and I'm the Corporate Director of Communities. Just to add to some of the feasibility conversations we've been having, if I may, Leader, because an awful lot of these capital projects fall within my directorate. And just to make clear, really, feasibility is an essential part of any project that we undertake. It's not something new, it's something that obviously Audit have mentioned is very important, but it's something, of course, that's a critical part of planning any project. So what we do is we look at all of the different parts of a project to see whether it's achievable, whether it's prudent to do it, what type of investment we need. Again, if it's a capital project, will it get planning permission? Does it contribute to employment objectives, etc. But one of the critical things to do for us is to look at risk. And what risk have we got with projects? And in particular, if we take an example of a building project, we always look at ground investigations, because what we do know for certain is when we're above ground and we're building buildings, we know exactly the cost of those because we're very experienced at that. But it's the below ground issues that we face. And also in some older buildings, such as Maesteg Town Hall, for instance, it's very hard, isn't it, until you start to get into that heart of the building to predict some of these things. But feasibility is a critical part of that, to ensure you have a robust budget allocation. And in that budget allocation, you should have a contingency fund. And the contingency there, it's normally 10 to 15%, and it sits there just for these unforeseen items. Now, it would be remiss to say we don't get unforeseens, because of course we do. and that's what this contingency budget is for. But the other thing as well, Leader, to make clear, sometimes we start a project and while we're in the project we decide to enhance it and to do more work, and sometimes the costs increase and they are driven by our desire or a community desire to make projects better, or while we're there, you know, we will do more. But just to reassure, feasibility is a critical part. We will continue to do that, and sometimes we'll do a feasibility and we'll completely change the scheme as a result of it, and that's right as well. We shouldn't assume just because we do a feasibility we will go ahead with the scheme. So a critical part of it, as is a robust contingency fund. So I do welcome the audit recommendations, and another very, very important thing is that we do a post-finished evaluation and we learn lessons, because we're always learning things as we go along, and rightly so, and that's a critical part really of any good project management cycle. So just to reassure that we do that, and we'd like to do more, make it more visible. Thank you, Leader.
That is reassuring about the process, about the progress that we've made, and a reflection on the complexities of capital programme infrastructure, and of course, added to all the different factors that were already there, we now have COVID-19, which requires a very different way of working on site and a very different set of timelines. And I know that has impacted and will continue to impact upon the cost of schemes and the timeliness of some of those schemes. And I know that members will be mindful of that when they are considering and looking at the capital programme. And we anticipate that impact to continue for some time, don't we, Janine? Because obviously, construction is an industry which traditionally has required workers to often be in confined spaces together and work in very closely with each other, and that has had to change because of the requirement for social distancing, and that will have an impact now and will have an impact going forward in the future. So thank you for that, Janine. And finally, Jill, again, it's a question we're often asked, and it seems that the answers need repeating for some people, and of course circumstances change, but just around the Treasury management function, you spoke earlier and clearly about the number of earmarked reserves, the grants that we have. The reason why we place those funds in accounts is to ensure that they're safe, because it's prudent to make sure that they're safe, and also that they provide with liquidity. But they are not spare funds, are they? We don't know when some of those funds will need to be committed, but in the meantime, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that they are managed in a proper way. But it is not spare money. It is not money to spend. It is money. It is our reserves. It is money that we're committed to spending in the future. But in the meantime, we are not going to keep it under your mattress, are we? We need to keep it in a safe place, and that is what the Treasury management function is for.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Leader. It's very much a timing issue. We obviously have significant amounts of money coming into the council and going out of the council, and we use those timing differences to invest wisely. If we have capital receipts, obviously, we also make sure that those are invested wisely. And years ago, we used to get some sort of interest rate on some of our investments that were wise. It was quite a surprise to find that we had to pay at one point to invest our money, but that's the way the world is at the moment. So yes, you've heard me say it a number of times: security, liquidity, which is obviously when we need to pay out, obviously things like salaries and wages, we need to make sure that we've got the cash, and then yield as the final part of that that acronym that I always use. So yes, it's wherever possible, we use our funds to invest internally, as we know, and we've been very successful in being able to borrow internally, and that's what that means. We've got the cash internally to be able to finance our expenditure. But obviously we will get into a borrowing situation as the strategies set out. Okay,
thank you for that, Jill, and thank you to the team that undertakes the work on behalf of the authority to ensure that our treasury management is successful, effective, and most importantly, is cautious and prudent in its work, and that we have a capital programme that is affordable and will be delivered going forward. Deputy Leader, do you move the recommendations? Do I have a seconder?
Right.
Second.
And is everyone in agreement with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That was the last report on today's agenda. The final item on the agenda is urgent items. I have not received any requests for urgent items to be considered in accordance with the Cabinet Procedure Rules in the Constitution, and therefore we will bring this meeting to a conclusion, and I look forward to seeing you all once again tomorrow afternoon for our meeting of full council.